I'm sure there's something you'd rather be doing right now instead of watching this video, such as relaxing on a tropical beach, eating ice cream, having a party with all your friends. What exactly is holding you back? Are you at the mercy of outside constraints, or is it your own personal decision? Questions like that Reinhard Sprenger deals with in his book Die Entscheidung liegt bei dir, the decision is up to you. And today we'll have a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I've got another book review for you. Die Entscheidung liegt bei dir, the decision is up to you by Reinhard Sprenger. Unfortunately, this book is not available in English. There is no English translation, but it is an interesting book, so we'll have a look at it nonetheless. Reinhard Sprenger is a German management and leadership consultant, and before this one he has written a couple of other books that are management guidebooks. A few of those even are available in English, by the way. And he thought, well, some of the ideas and approaches I teach in my management books, they could be transferred to life in general. So he wrote this book, The Decision is Up to You. His basic, most important idea is that we are self-determined, that there is self-efficacy, and that we are responsible for ourselves. This is an idea that is quite important and quite common in soft skills. We previously had a look at Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, where this idea is quite important. Frankl basically was the one who started the whole self-determination business. Then we had a look at Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where the idea of self-determination is also quite important. And now we will have a look at Sprenger's book. It is divided into 3 parts and we will have a look at each of those. I will wait with the criticism until the end because that should work better for this book. In the first part, the topic and the problem is introduced. According to Sprenger, we are self-determined. We always decide what our lives should be like. But every decision we make has consequences that we have to accept. For example, we might not like to get up and go to work in the morning, but we actually have a choice not to do so. However, if we don't go, we will have to face the consequences. In this case, we will get into trouble with our employer. The situation we are in, the life we currently lead, is the result of our choices. We have chosen our current situation. However, we tend to deny our freedom of choice and make ourselves the plaything of outside circumstances. This is reflected a lot in our language because we frequently say, I can't, I must, or I have no time. Well, actually, if we say I can't, we usually mean I don't want to. And if we say I must, this usually means I don't want to pay the price for the alternative, such as when we get up in the morning and go to work even though we don't feel like it. And if we say I don't have enough time, what we actually mean is something else is more important to me. Sprenger gives an example here that I've previously mentioned in the video about the 4 burners theory. He says when he talks to high-ranking leaders in business, he often asks them, what is most important to you in your life? And they usually say, my children. And then he asks them, how much time do you spend with your children in an average week? And you can imagine how that turns out. And according to Sprenger, what we actually end up doing, that is what we really want, no matter what we say or claim. If we deny our freedom of choice, we also take away the possibility of action and of change from ourselves. Because if I say my situation is due to outside circumstances, is due to other people, then this also means that I am powerless to change it. I can only sit and wait and hope that outside circumstances will change, or that someone else does something about my situation, instead of getting up myself and taking action to improve the situation. In the second part of the book, the problem is examined in more detail, and Sprenger also talks about causes and consequences. In regard to causes, one thing that is very important are rewards. Because in theory, rewards are intended to motivate us. However, what they actually do is they destroy our own personal inner motivation, our intrinsic motivation, and they replace that with an outside drive, an outside motivation. So if before we did something because we actually enjoyed or liked the doing, because we saw sense in what we did, then if we merely wish to gain the reward, this doing itself becomes a mere means to an end, and we just do it to get the reward, and it doesn't matter to us anymore if it makes sense. We just do it as someone else wants it to be done because we want to get the reward. And similarly to rewards, Sprenger is also very critical of praise. Praise is usually regarded a good thing, positive feedback. However, Sprenger says that praise is also highly manipulative, because the person who gives praise to others creates a kind of parent-child relationship. Now, seasoned viewers of the channel would probably say it creates a complementary relationship, where one person, the one who gives the praise, takes on a higher position, and he judges the other person from that elevated position, and he puts himself in a position where he can decide what is right or what is wrong, and where he can judge the other person. In Sprenger's point of view, the important thing about praise is not that it is positive judgment, but that it is judgment. And he is also quite critical of questions, because they also have a highly manipulative nature. And he is critical of role models, because if I follow a role model, I deprecate myself. I basically say, well, I am no good. It would be better if I'd be like him or like her. An interesting point Sprenger also brings up in the second part is about comparisons, because Sprenger says comparisons are the death of happiness. If I keep saying, oh, well, my neighbor has a greater car than me, my colleague has a bigger office, this person I know has a greater job, then I will end up feeling unhappy about what I have, even if it isn't that bad. Later, Sprenger also brings up ideals in a similar regard, where we don't compare our situation to the situation of someone else, to a real other situation, but to an idealized idea that we have in our mind, such as if I sit in my apartment and I like my apartment, it's nice, I furnished it as I wanted it to be and everything, and then in my mind I imagine the villa of my dreams, how grand it is and all the things I have there, and after that my apartment doesn't seem so nice anymore. Sprenger also talks about burnout and some aspects he regards as important causes, important factors. First, there is the illusion that we can have it all in life, that we can have a great career, a great family life, a rich social life, all at the same time. This pretty much goes in a similar direction to what we discussed in the video about the 4 burners theory. And another important factor for Sprenger is the illusion that there are right decisions, correct decisions. Here he refers to people who have regrets on their deathbeds. For example, who say, oh, I worked too much, I should have spent more time with my family. Because according to Sprenger, we always do that, what is most important to us at the moment, no matter what we say or claim, and to later re-evaluate those decisions in retrospect to say, oh, well, the alternative would also have been nice, and now I didn't experience the alternative as well. Now this is a certain way to become unhappy. And an interesting point about burnout Sprenger brings up is that he says burnout occurs if we say yes but mean no. If we do something we don't really want, we don't really believe in, for reasons that aren't really our own. I find this quite interesting. In the third and final part, Sprenger talks about how we can live a self-determined life, take responsibility for ourselves, and in general live a happier and a successful life. Of course, for Sprenger, most important is that we make our own happiness, that we create the life we want, that we are able to make a difference. Here he relies on a classic motto, love it, change it, or leave it. So we should do what we do, for example, our work with love and with excitement and with passion. Now, if you say, oh, well, I can't love my work because it totally sucks, then we should try to change it, to change the situation, to make it better so we can do it with love and with passion. And if that doesn't work, we should make a clear cut and leave. So, for example, look for another job where the situation is better. Another classic motto Sprenger brings up is the journey is the destination by Confucius. This is an interesting idea. Usually objectives, goals, destinations are quite useful. People who have a specific goal in mind and have clearly defined their goal are more likely to succeed in achieving that goal than people who just have a vague idea of what they want. However, if we focus too much on that goal, if we place too much emphasis on it, we get a similar problem as with the rewards, because the doing itself becomes a mere means to an end, and we lose the enjoyment of the actual doing. For example, if I would say, oh, I want to finish the next video, I want to upload the next video, and then I would do the research, stupid book, I want to upload the video, I would write the script, damn script, I want to upload the video, I would do the recording, welcome, I want to upload the damn video, and once I finally done it and uploaded the video, it would be quite a shallow victory, because I wouldn't have enjoyed the actual doing, the actual getting there, and the whole thing would have lost its interest and its enjoyment. One thing that is very important for Sprenger is awareness. And this takes quite a similar direction to what we discussed in the videos about mindfulness. For example, the book review about Wherever You Go, There You Are by John Kabat-Zinn. Sprenger says that we need to be present in the moment, in our actual life as it takes place, instead of dwelling in the past or in the future. He doesn't refer to mindfulness or use the term, but his description is quite similar. Other things that are important for Sprenger and that are helpful in achieving a happier life are discipline and concentration, and the ability to overcome failure and to grow from it rather than to be dragged down by it. So once we've made a decision, we should really follow through with all our might. At the end of the third part, Sprenger takes small detours. He discusses whether our will actually is free, where he discusses findings from neuroscience, and he talks about how the ideas of self-determination, self-efficacy can be transferred to a grander social and political scale. Both those chapters I find somewhat problematic, because those are really big and complex topics by themselves that you can't really discuss in such a short and brief manner. And here we get to the criticism. There is one major point I'd like to talk about in a bit more detail, because I find it to be rather important. Sprenger describes self-efficacy as somewhat absolute, and he doesn't really take into account the limitations and constraints that are connected to it. For example, he says that everything is a consequence of our choices. Everything that happens in our lives is somehow a result of our choices. At one point he says, if you get run over by a car on the street, now this might seem like something from outside happening to you, but actually if you decided to take part in the traffic outside, you also took the risk of having such an accident, which I find somewhat strange. He accepts that there are some things we have no influence over, such as our own birth or natural disasters. However, he only briefly mentions that and doesn't really take it into account for the most parts of the book. At this point, I would ask, for example, if we have no control over our own birth and then we are alive, we have a body and everything. What about self-preservation? Is that really our own decision, or is there a finite pressure involved there? So for example, if I eat, drink, sleep, is this my decision? Or isn't it really a necessity? And so if I work to buy food, isn't this a certain necessity as well? But, this isn't really considered in the book. And another very important thing that is only discussed very briefly is our dependency on others. Because as humans we live in communities, and the actions and personalities of other people have great influence on our own lives. For example, at one point Sprenger says we have chosen the partner we are in a relationship with, and if we are single, we have also chosen that. And at this point, several singles are probably pretty upset because they have decided they would like to be in a relationship, and they actively try to find someone, to find a mate, but they haven't succeeded yet. Because you can decide you would like to be in a relationship, but you can't enforce it. You can't make it happen. Someone else has a say in that as well. And it's similar in our working lives. We can say, I would like to work at that company, and we can make an effort, we can apply for a position there and everything, but the final choice is up to someone else. So this is quite an important aspect where self-efficacy has its limits. Now you might wonder why that is a problem. Aren't those very abstract and philosophical considerations? Yeah, sure. However, it is important because, for once, if we focus too much on this idea of an absolute self-efficacy, we lose sight of the other side of this issue, because self-efficacy has a very important counterpart, which is the ability to accept the things as they are and to accept that you cannot change some things, and to learn to accept and to tolerate those things. You might know the Serenity Prayer by an American theologist that goes like this: God, give me the courage to change what I can change, the serenity to accept that which I cannot change, and the ability to tell one from the other. Now, this pretty much sums it up in my eyes. Covey also had an interesting approach to combining those two aspects. Covey said there is an outer circle of concern that includes all the things that have any relevance for our lives, for ourselves. And within that big circle, there is a smaller circle, a circle of influence that includes all the things we really have control over or that we can influence in any way. And according to Covey, the problem is that a lot of people focus on this outer circle, the circle of concern. They deal primarily with things they can't change instead of focusing on the things they can change. So, for example, people might complain about their boss, their work, their company, things they cannot really change, instead of, for example, looking for another job that might suit them better. And a second very severe problem of this emphasis on self-efficacy is that it is only a small step to quite questionable ideas, such as switching culprit and victim or victim shaming, because if everything in our lives is a result of our own choices, how does that influence our perception of actual victims? For example, people who are severely ill, we might end up saying, oh, well, it's probably your own fault in some way. It's probably a result of your lifestyle. Maybe God has given you this illness. You probably know what you did wrong. Or a very sinister example for such views is the classic rape myth, where people say, oh, well, the way she dressed, she was basically asking for it. It's not the guy's fault, it's her own fault. So you see, this really is quite dangerous. And this also has relevance on a political level, especially in relation to neoliberal ideas, because if you say that everything that happens to someone is his own fault, then, for example, if you look at people who are unemployed, you put yourself in a position to treat those people quite differently and to treat them way worse. And also on an individual level, there are problems, because if you believe everything that goes wrong in your life is your own personal fault, you will blame yourself for everything, even things where clearly outside factors or other people are to blame. And you might also overestimate or overstrain yourself. Now, burnout, that Sprenger himself mentioned, is of course quite important here. In psychology, there is also an interesting phenomenon known as John Henryism, named after a guy who used a big hammer and a steel drill to drill holes into rock that were used to place explosives for building tunnels. And this guy, this John Henry, he took part in a race against a steam machine, a steam-powered rock drill. And John Henry actually won that race against the steam-powered machine. However, shortly after his victory, he fell down dead because his heart couldn't take the strain. And John Henryism describes a situation where people believe so strongly in self-efficacy, where people believe, oh, if it doesn't go the way I want, I just have to put in more effort, I just have to try even harder, that they overstrain themselves or even damage their own health and well-being. And another smaller point I would like to mention is that obviously there are also positive outside influences. We might get lucky. A great chance might present itself. And from other people we also receive help and support. And all of that we should acknowledge and we should receive with gratitude. So, bottom line is, here, such as everywhere else, there is not the single truth, the single value that is greater than all others, the single solution that works for everyone. Self-efficacy and responsibility for oneself are very important. However, they have their limits, and you also have to consider the counterparts, such as acceptance. In this regard, I can recommend my video about Schulz von Thun's square of value and development. I think that is quite helpful to better understand the concept. So, what else is there to say about Sprenger's book? Now, as I described, it deals with the topic of self-determination, self-efficacy in great detail. It describes a lot of different aspects, but at the same time it is somewhat one-sided. It leaves out a lot of things, and this is something that is noticeable throughout the entire book, because to maintain this image of an almost absolute self-efficacy, Sprenger leaves out a lot of things. For example, there is usually no difference between the decision and the result, such as for those singles I mentioned, who have decided that they would like to be in a relationship, but they still are in a decision where they are not because things didn't work out. And situations like those are not discussed by Sprenger at all. And furthermore, he draws a sharp line between difficult and impossible. He basically says, if there is the slightest possibility, then it is still, you still have free choice and everything is great. And he gives an example of a dentist who gave up his work as a dentist and rented a sailboat, and who is now doing tours for tourists. And this as an example for a guy for a person who totally changed his entire life to show that it is possible. And at this point you might be reminded of an example from Feierabend by Volker Kietz that we discussed before, where a heart surgeon gave up his position to become a truck driver. And you might recall what Volker Kietz said about this story. Kietz said, we should imagine this situation would have been the other way around. An aging truck driver would have decided that he would like to be a heart surgeon, or a guy who does tours for tourists with a sailboat would have decided that he'd like to be a dentist. Now, in this case, this wouldn't have ended in such a heartwarming story, but probably in a rather tragic one. And I believe that there is a fluent transition between difficult and impossible. You get to a point where in theory it is still possible, but in reality it is so unlikely that it makes no sense to pursue it. And what is also left out by Sprenger is the outside pressure that influences a decision. For example, imagine a secret agent giving away government secrets to the enemy. It doesn't matter if that secret agent gives away the secrets under torture or if he just sells the secrets to the other side. For Sprenger, it is all the same. He decided to give away the secrets he could have done otherwise. Or a bit more down to the ground, let's say a millionaire who evades taxes and a hungry person who steals food are both the same. They decided to commit a crime they could have done otherwise, and the situation behind that decision, the pressure that those people had to face, this is entirely ignored. Another point that I find a bit difficult is that Sprenger's core statements sometimes contradict each other a bit. At the beginning of the book, he clearly says that what we end up doing is what we really want to do. However, when he discusses burnout, he says, burnout happens if we say yes but mean no, if we do something we do not want to do, which is suddenly possible. A moment later, when he discusses regrets on the deathbed, it's back to we always do what we really want to do. So this is somewhat inconsistent. He also makes some strong assertions that are not really substantiated. For example, when he talks about burnout, he says that a burnout would be an example of a situation where the term does not describe the illness but create it. So he basically says a lot of those people who suffer from burnout are just simulants, and it's not real for a lot of those. And this is a statement I'd rather have from an experienced doctor than from someone who just makes it up. Now at this point, you might be surprised that I actually do like the book. I enjoyed reading the book, and I think it is helpful and useful. Now, this rather one-sided treatment of the subject, to some degree, I am willing to accept that as a stylistic choice, because Sprenger has a clear message and he has a clear target audience, people who are dissatisfied with their lives, who could actually make a change, but who do not do it because they believe that they are at the mercy of outside circumstances. And to really get the message across, he serves them double. He really puts it on, and he omits all of the things that would make his message seem weaker. Now, of course, I think this might work well for that target audience, but of course, it wouldn't work as well for other people. For example, people who tend to be very critical of themselves, who judge themselves very harshly. Now for those, this is clearly the wrong book. But I think the idea and the concept of self-determination and self-efficacy is important, is helpful for a lot of people, and I think there are more people who have too little of that than those people who have too much of it already. So, in the end, we will never end up with a book that we just have to open and the unfiltered great wisdom will pour out. We always have to be conscious about what we read and to question those ideas presented by the author and to think about it ourselves. And this is just the same here. What about you? Have you read books by your local authors who present similar ideas? I think this whole idea of self-determination and self-efficacy is more present in the English-speaking countries than in Germany. So you probably have come into contact with those ideas and concepts more frequently. Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to your feedback. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate a like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. I would be quite happy to have you as a subscriber. We will see each other next week in the next channel update. For today, I take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.